There we go. Awesome. Thank you, Seán, for joining me to have a chat about music and life in Ireland and the role that music and storytelling has played in your life. I thought we could begin at the start. So for you, you grew up in Ireland. You were born in Ireland in sort of the mid-40s. What was life like with music and storytelling and the traditions of Ireland around those two key components of Irish culture for you growing up there?
So in every village in Ireland, when I was a kid growing up in the 1940s, there was what was called a tach scoríochta, which means a kind of the English translation would be a rambling house.
Oh,
And so ramble to it in the evening, when the day's work was done on the farm or whatever. And the local Shanachie was the center, so the storyteller. So they would come to the house of the storyteller. But everybody had to contribute in the sense that you had to sing a song, and you had to dance or recite a poem. There was no freebies, but the storyteller was the core of it. But people didn't just get to listen and get entertained and not contribute. So everybody had to have a party piece, a song they sang or a poem they knew or whatever. But the storyteller was the core. So he was the Shanachie, and so every village had its Shanachie and its Tach. And I was lucky enough that it was my grandfather, whom I called Daddy Jim. He was the Shanachie in our area. So I grew up, hearing all of the great folk tales of Ireland. And it's like there were different eras of folk tales in Ireland. So you had the ancient ones, which were the about the red branch knight, going way back pre-Christian times. And then you had stories about the Fianna, which come from around the time of Christ. And then you had a kind of local stories about local characters. And so there was very different genres. So some of the stories would be epics that would take, 2 or 3 nights in the telling. So it'd
wow.
be like a, yeah. And then some stories are much shorter, and some are kind of just like little vignettes. So there's very different kinds of stories. But you tended to get the same kinds of motifs, particularly with the Red Branch Knights from Northern Ireland, from Ulster. That's where the Red Branch Knights had lived. And then Cuchulainn was more or less in Leinster, modern day Leinster. And so you get different regional kinds of stories, but then there were some that managed to permeate the entire island. So everybody knew about Niamh Cian Óir, Niamh of the Golden Hair, and Oisin, and Fionn McCool and Cuchulainn. Everybody had heard those kinds of stories. So they were the kind of the dispersal of the various levels and genres of storytelling. And of course, proverbs were a real part of it, and music was a great part of it. So for me, I believe that in some senses that I would define personality as the interface between essence and environment. So when a soul comes into incarnation, the personality emerges because of the environment in which the soul finds itself. And if the soul were to be in a different environment, a different personality would emerge.
Mm.
And I think in some senses that culture is the personality of the community. So it's the same effect. So you get a community together, and depending on the environmental circumstances, whether they're enslaved people or free people or farming people or fisher folk or whatever, then you get a very different kind of a culture emerging. So I would see culture then as kind of the personality of the group. And I see 3 different parts to that very often. I see the soul of the community you'll find in its prayers and in its greetings. And then the heart of the community you're going to find in its music and its art. Uh,
Mm.
and then the head of the community you're going to find in the stories and the parables. So that's how I like to kind of divide it up as I think back to my childhood.
Wow, that was really interesting that you sort of felt that the music is felt in that heart of the community as opposed to in the head or yeah, I totally get that. And I feel like when I'm listening to songs from Ireland or from any of the Celtic nations, that it hits me here. It hits me here and then it comes out through here. I cry. Sort of, I will listen to a beautiful song. It won't even be a sad song, but it'll bring tears to my eyes. Or if I'm trying to start singing it and then I have to stop because I'm choking up, it sort of rises up through your body almost. And yeah, that's really interesting that somehow music is the heart speaking through the other parts of our bodies. And I know in Ireland there's sort of broadly three types of music, correct? There's sort of Galtri, Goyatri, and Suantri. Or could you
Yes.
speak a little bit more to that, Sean?
Sure. And so any Irish musician worth his salt would be able to produce music in all these different kinds. And so the Gultry was music that made you kind of cry nostalgically for the homeland or whatever. And obviously it was really popular in the Irish diaspora, that you're trying to remember home. And so it's a kind of real remembering past times. And so even if you don't understand the Gaelic, so I'll give you one example. So, for instance, there's in the 1700s, the Irish were subject to the penal laws, where it was illegal to be Catholic, and it was a crime to be a priest, and the priests were killed. And so the priests were being trained in the continent in big Irish colleges in Louvain and Rome and Paris and places like that, and then sneak back into Ireland and have to say mass secretly in the woodlands, at what we call Mass Rocks, Corrigan we called it. And there's a story coming from that period of time of a priest saying mass at a Mass Rock, and the congregation is around him, and somehow the redcoats have been tipped off, and they surprise them and they capture him. And it's after the consecration of the Mass, so there's a consecrated host on the altar, which he wasn't able to retrieve. So he's now locked up in jail. He's going to be executed, and he's looking out to the bars of the jail, and there's a parishioner passing by. So he's trying to figure out what happened to the host, because at that stage, lay people couldn't handle the host. He's trying to figure out, is it still surviving, or did the weather destroy it? And so he can't speak, naturally about it. So he had to make up a song, and he pretends that he's asking about a lover. And he's saying, "Did you see my beloved? And did you see this beautiful, gorgeous woman with the great voice and the curvaceous form and whatever?" So he's singing it in Gaelic, and the guy picks up and responds to him in Gaelic. So here's what it sounds like. You can kind of feel the pathos in it, just in the Gaelic itself. So it goes like this. He's asking, "Why you at the Mass Rock?" Aratu agangari no wachatu hen mohra no wachatu gilla agis finne agis kef namna no wachatu antu bochwara es pavil shabla. No wachatu mo Valentine isen will she ekli maratime. And the parishioner responds to him, giving him the bad news. The via second garing is doch ik men doch is doch ik me gilla agus finne agus céif na mná, is doch gan ik me an tú. Chua is baví se blá. Is doch gan ik me do Valentine, agus níl si ekli maratime. So we can hear the pathos in it, and the
Yeah.
host dissolved and disintegrated. But so, even when you don't speak Irish, there's a sense to the music itself that this is a sad song, there's not stuff like that. So you have to be able to produce that kind of music that made people nostalgic for former times or for distant family or stuff. And then the second thing sometimes we call it Gord 3, and sometimes it's called Gyan 3. It's music to make you laugh, And then the third one was Swan 3, which was kind of lullabies to put little children to sleep and stuff like that. So a good musician had to be able to produce all three kinds of music.
And was it, sorry, Sean, you've just sung that beautiful song for us, and there's no sort of self-consciousness for you. It's just you're delivering the message of the song to whoever's listening. And I feel in the modern world, people are so worried about how they sound. Oh, I'm not a good singer, I can't sing. And there's this sort of sense that singing doesn't belong to the people anymore. It belongs to this group of musicians, these superstars who can sing. Or you've got a fabulous, fabulous voice. Only you can sing, you know, and there's that sense of not owning our voices or being proud or understanding the importance of singing our songs. When you were growing up, were people a lot more eager to just sing, even if they didn't have a technically good voice?
It wasn't so much the quality of the singer as much as the message of the song, you know, and the energy behind it. And so it's one of the things I see between now and then was that, you know, back then people knew hundreds of songs. They knew the words to the songs. Yeah. Whereas now kids are exposed to all kinds of music. They're exposed to a lot more music, but they don't know the words to any of the songs, you know, apart from the current hit, then it's gone and they can't remember it anymore. And so it was kind of the message of the song rather than the quality of the singer that was really important. And everybody had to participate, as I say. When you went to the Tachsgeriachta, you know, there were no freebies. You had to be there as a participant, even though the core person obviously was the storyteller, the Shanachi, but everybody else was expected to contribute. And so people would have what they call the kind of their party piece, the piece that they loved to perform for others. So, but everybody had to participate, and they knew the words to all of these songs.
Wow. What was your party piece, Seán?
I love the funny ones, you know, and particularly ones that mixed Irish and English. So there's one called, let me pass the name of it. Well, it's called One Day for Recreation. So it mixes Irish and Gaelic. And the story, the 1800s, you know, Catholic emancipation happened in 1829. So now it's no longer illegal to be a Catholic, you know, our priests aren't being killed. But there's still this huge divide between Catholic and Protestant. So it's the story about a young Kerry man in the local town, and he goes into a shop and he sees this gorgeous looking girl, and she's singing away to herself, and he's totally smitten. Yeah, and he wants to propose to her immediately, and he does. But then the two fathers have to get together to arrange the marriage. So he asks her, "Who's your father?" And she tells him, "The local Protestant minister." So that's the kind of the background
Love
to the
it.
song, half in Irish and half in English, and it goes like this. It says, "One day for recreation, Scania Biomach a doctor. I spied a charming fair maid in the Henner Sea Shupasting. She was singing like an angel, Smeg Erstocht, Lena Binacha. I asked her soft and easy, she had Dutzi Staden Raderocht, Snalsen Nolavarin, the Valiest of Elton, Savannah's Stochimana, Bavralem Vegam Willad. Snalsen Nolavarin, the Valiest of Elton, Savannah's Stochimana, Bavralem Vegam Willad. I asked her who her father was. She had Urchilam, on minister. I stood in danger, Scarbuelach from the fishing. If I had her in a net grove, either Cleach, August Macaras, your charming eyes do chase me. Trellarnach rita tanachat, Snolsen Nolavarin, the valiest of Eltona, Savannah's Stochimana, Bavralem Vegam Willad. Snolsen Nolavarin, the valiest of Eltona, Savannah's Stochimana, Bavralem Vegam Willad. You'll get my stocking ferm, my hentolam, gummuckeres. And then she smiled most dainty. Ach, Rachel, I'm fond of you. So now, Olivar in the valiest of Elton, Savannah Stochimana, Bavralem Vegam Willad. So now, Olivar in the valiest of Elton, Savannah Stochimana, Bavralem Vegam Willad.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Seán. What a fabulous party piece. And so you remember all of the words and the tune even now. I mean, how long has it been since you first learnt that song?
I mean, I probably learned that when I was like 8 or 9. So we're
Yeah.
talking 70 years.
Yeah, wow. And so you live in the US now. You live up in Healdsburg. Um, is
Right,
Healdsburg in California?
it's in Northern California.
Yep. Okay, in
Almost
Tiranog.
exactly. Yeah. So big signpost that I put up years ago, and just a few yards from my house, and there are 4 finger posts on it. And one of them says Ireland, 5,061 miles. And the other one says Kenya, 9,381 miles. And the other one says Palo Alto, 95 miles. And the other says Tirnanog, 0. It says Tirnanog.
Yeah, I love that. So even
I'm sure,
though, pardon,
I'm
Sean?
sure you know at this stage that, in Ireland, we have 2 names for the place. Sometimes it's called Tír Fáthán, which means the land under the waves. So allegedly it's the home place of the Tuatha Dé Danann. And then the second name is Tír na Nog, the land of the ever young. So it goes by 2 names.
I love that. That's where you live now. Um,
Oh,
so such vast distances of space and time for you to have held on to this song. And I imagine there's probably lots of other songs that still are with you from that
yeah,
period of time in Ireland. Do you see music as a tether to your original homeland?
very much so. I mean, you're absolutely right that it grabs the heart, more than the head or the soul even. Although they're intermingled a little bit. But like yourself, I have tears in my eyes when I hear a song from the 1940s and 1950s from Ireland. Although I've been out of Ireland now since 1972. Went to Africa in 1972. So basically, I'm 52 years out of Ireland. But as you put it so very beautifully, I'm tethered there at a soul level, and at a psychic level, and at a kind of a heart level. That's
Mm.
where the heart is.
Do you think do you think music then is a window to the soul or a connection to God herself or the Great Spirit?
Very much so, because there's something very special about sound. That sound is not just the kind of the articulation of words that make sense cognitively, but that it brings a vibration with it, which literally it changes the kind of the activity of the chest cavity, and therefore affects the heart. And so, there's the statement that those who sing pray twice, because you're not just singing kind of with the words or the vocalization, but you're sending out a vibration literally that's impacting the listeners. And I imagine it's true even if it's recorded and it's going through kind of electromagnetic waves, that the harmonics and the kind of the frequencies, they manage to kind of be transmitted through those modalities, and they still have the same kind of effect, on people. And so when I hear John's Gospel, for instance, where and the prologue to John's Gospel says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were created by Him, and without Him was made nothing that was made." And so for me, you've heard me say this in church a few times, that I talk about the 5 L's. That the first one is love. That ultimately there is only love. There is only God. But that love kind of gives birth to light, and light, we know from physics that all matter is simply frozen light. And then, but the light creates matter. But then you need the logos, the sound, the frequency, as a kind of a morphological agent that takes mere matter and fashions it into particular kinds of forms. It's as if, like, you have a potter with clay. So the clay, the light is the clay, it's the matter, but the potter is the logos that gives form to the clay, various kinds. And the objective is to produce, drinking vessels or plates or whatever that feed the soul. And
Mm.
so um, the sound then becomes really important. So the logos for me is this kind of, I call it a morphological agent that actually creates form from matter. And so it creates the form of the kind of the soul energy. When you hear something being sung, you're being embraced at 2 levels. The words, the cognitive meaning of the words is giving you a lesson at one stage, but the vibration to which you're being subjected gives a much deeper message, because it's a heart connection rather than a head connection.
Yeah. And I guess in the context of the church, and Sean, you were a Catholic priest, and so you're very familiar with the Catholic Mass and obviously the Christian Eucharistic liturgy and the hymns. And the Catholic Mass as a form of sacred musical composition, like Gregorian chants, I guess, originally, what, in the 7th century or something, there were these Gregorian chants. So it's important that these are sung or were sung and not just spoken. Is that
Very important.
yeah.
And so one thing that I love about Catholic liturgies, particularly going back with the times of the Latin Mass, that a good liturgy is kind of the ritualization of story. So you take a great story and you ritualize it in kind of particular kinds of movements, and it's a multi-sensory kind of a message.
Yeah.
And so step into a high mass traditionally, and so our eyes are being engaged. You're looking at stained glass windows. So the music is addressing the ears and also the body. There's the physical vibration, and then there's the smell of incense. You're engaging kind of the olfactory sense, and then at communion, you're kind of the taste buds. So every good liturgy should embrace all of the sensory modalities, and then it should create an altered state of consciousness that allows not just the voice to sing, but the soul to sing as well, and the heart.
So music is really important in the Christian tradition. I guess in many, many spiritual traditions, it's important because it speaks to that part of us that we can't always communicate through words, but we can feel it in our bodies. Yeah.
And that's why we introduced liturgical dance. That was really, really powerful when you see particularly the feminine form with long flowing gowns, dancing to the liturgy. And it's like there's an angelic kind of a feel to it. The movements, the graceful movements, and even the swirling of the skirts and the movement of the hands, that literally what it reminds me of, if you see a candle flame, as it's kind of pirouetting its way upwards from the wick, into the ether, that it represents a kind of an ascension process. And just like watching that happen in liturgical dancing.
Wow. Yes, it's sort of like a being carried upward, isn't it? It's a very uplifting experience. Isn't that funny how sound sort of feels like what is that about sound? It's elevating, isn't it? It's not compressing or pushing downwards. It's like lifting. What is that? I
think part of what it is that, acoustical, an acoustical kind of electromagnetics at the acoustical level is kind of radiating in all directions spherically. So it's not going just horizontally, or it's not just going vertically, or it's not just going at an angle of 45. It's literally from the source in every direction simultaneously. And so even if you're down under, upside down as you guys are.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it keeps on spreading outwards. And so, Seán, do you feel that particular music that is created by a particular group of people, be it a Christian people, like a spiritual group of people, or an Indigenous people, do you think that the music that is sort of born and creatively grown through these groups, through these cultural groups, I guess, do you think it has a healing capacity for that group somehow?
Hugely important. And I think, like everything else, there are cultures that have really brought that to a very, very high level. I mean, my understanding of the original peoples of the Antipodes, Australia, I'm more familiar with. I think about it, and the belief system was that the elders sang the world into being. That it was the music of the elders that actually created physical form. And my understanding is that an Aboriginal Australian would never travel in any location without knowing the music of the mountain or the stream or whatever. They wouldn't dare interact with it until they had paid it the reverence of knowing its music. And I can just imagine that the kind of the barbarity and the kind of the ignorance of us Europeans when we went down there and were trampling all over without knowing the music of the land or the music of the mountain, or the music of the stream, just like barbarians trampling through sacred ground. And I'm sure they couldn't believe what we were doing. And so that sense that, in a sense, that actually music is their om, or the logos is actually the sound that brings the cosmic the physical cosmos into being. And that it becomes really important to us that we relate to that, and that we continue to co-create with sound. And so I definitely find that in Ireland, and you can find it in Sanskrit, obviously. Sanskrit is a belief system that, it is the sounds of Sanskrit that actually give it its meaning, not the kind of the alphabet or the written characteristics, but that you have to sound it in order to bring the meaning of it out. It's
Wow.
only in the sound and what the true meaning is. And I would say the same thing is true in Ireland, that that the sounds of the music create, a coilite, a thin place, where the veil between the mystical and the mundane is diaphanous, and energies and entities are passing through at will, there are no blockages. So there's but it's dangerous. So my father's party piece was a song called By the Shortcut to the Rosses. Do you know that one?
No.
It's the story about occasionally a fairy woman, and that's what a banshee means. A banshee just a fairy woman. It's not just somebody who's wailing because somebody's going to die. It literally means a fairy woman, a feminine fairy folk. And so there's this song. Occasionally, fairy women would seduce human males, and then break their hearts and disappear. So there's this song about a man in Donegal who's going through a woodland area called the Rosses, and he encounters a fairy woman and he falls completely in love with her. But the result is this. It says this. And it was on the 1st of May to make things worse, and Bealtaine.
Yep.
So it says, by the shortcut to the Rosses, a fairy girl I met. I was taken by her beauty, as a fish is in a net. The fern and furl to look at her, so very fair was she, with her hair as bright as seaweed that floats in from the deep. By the shortcut to the Rosses, 'twas on the 1st of May, I heard the fairies piping, and they piped my heart away. They piped till I was mad with joy. And when I was alone, I found they'd piped my heart away, and in my breast a stone. By the shortcut to the Rosses, 'tis I'll go nevermore, lest she should also steal my soul, who stole my heart before, lest she steal my soul and crush it like a dead leaf in her hand. For the shortcut to the Rosses is the way to fairyland. So that was his piece.
Thank you, Sean. I love every time you sing. It's beautiful.
So that was the effect of music, and it was the fairy music that seduced people to cross the veil. So
Yeah.
you have to be careful.
Wasn't
when you
Daddy Jim once, didn't he go
Yeah.
missing in a castle near in Blarney, somewhere near Blarney Castle?
About 2 miles away from Blarney Castle, but there's a huge big fairy fort near Blarney Castle. And the story he told me, and of course, he's my grandfather, therefore he's telling the absolute truth. And this fairy fort is famous for fairies living underneath the ground. So they live about 2 miles from Blarney, and one day his mother sends him down to the shop to buy a pound of sugar for the tea. And he goes down, he's a 7-year-old boy wandering around and delaying, of course. And he buys the pound of sugar and he's on his way home, and now it's getting dark. And he hears this music coming from the fairy fort, and he goes up and he sees this little aperture in the ground, small enough to admit a little child. So he crawls in, and he's in this huge big underground chamber, and it's all lit up with torches, and there are hundreds of fairy folk, and they're having a KLE, a kind of a music session, and he's fascinated watching them. And all of a sudden they recognize him, and they bid him come in, and they ask him, can you play music? And he was a great musician. He used to play the fiddle, the concert flute, the tin whistle, the accordion, the piano, all
Wow.
these things. So he goes in and they give him a fiddle, and he starts playing for them. And so he has no idea how much time has passed. And they said, have a cup of tea with us. And then they discovered they have no sugar. So he says, I've got a pound of sugar here. So he gives them the sugar, and they use the sugar for the tea, and he has a cup of tea, and then they let him go. And he comes out, and he finds this big tribal people with a big burly policeman. They've been looking for him for 7 days. Been missing for 7 days.
Oh
Kind
my
of a weird
goodness.
picture. And his mother, talk about Jesus being lost in the temple. Mary only had to worry for 3 days. His mother had to worry for 7 days. So they're dragging him home. So that was his first encounter with the fairy folk.
That's incredible. So music and magic and mystical experiences are deeply intertwined in the Irish tradition, and storytelling and music are also deeply intertwined. What is it about music and stories that is important, the combo of the two?
Well, it's interesting that a really good storyteller, I think, is able to engage the imagination of the hearer. So a good storyteller is not telling you a story. A good storyteller is creating a scenario and a scene into which you enter, and then you journey on your own. There's a kind of a guidance coming from the voice of the storyteller, but you're using your entire imagination. So there's no TV, so you're not being given images of what the storyteller is talking about. You're going to have to create these yourself. And if you talk about the wind or kind of the sound of a stream rushing or salmon jumping, whatever, now you as the listener have to create these sounds and these scenes for yourself. So the voice of the storyteller is a musical instrument, and you're the bow or you're the violin on which it's playing. Yeah. So you have to be strung in such a way that you're not going to create cacophony and your kind of understanding and your embrace of the story, because you're creating the story, and that's what Jesus is doing. Jesus creating stories in which he's not giving facts or data. He's transporting the person out of the mind, and away just from mere symbolism into the mysticism of the encounter with the ultimate reality, of which the story is just a kind of a little vignette.
Wow. I love that idea of us being the instruments of the story.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that before, Sean, but we create, we are the strings or the buttons or the keys of a story, aren't we? And it sounds different. The story will sound different through us than it will through someone else, that being someone who's a storyteller or someone who's listening and then creating the story for themselves. That's incredible. How important do you think it is that songs are sung in their native tongue, in their native language? Is there something about singing songs, Irish songs in Irish, that's important, instead of translating them to English and then forgetting about the language and just going, oh, well, now everyone speaks English, so we're just going to sing this song in English now? Why is it important that we retain songs in the Indigenous language that they were written in?
It's hugely important for several reasons, because often stuff doesn't translate really well, and this is one of the reasons, when you start translating the stories of Jesus from ancient Aramaic, which is the language he would have been speaking, into a modern culture. I give you a typical example. When I was working in Kenya, I was working with the Kalenjin peoples, who were nomadic pastoralists. They had no kind of tradition whatsoever of agriculture. And you take a parable like Jesus says, a farmer went out to sow the wheat, and at night after he'd sown it, an enemy came and sowed cockle among the wheat. Now, your average American has no idea what cockle means. Why did he choose cockle as distinct from a different kind of a weed? Because in the early stages of germination, cockle looks identical to wheat. You can't distinguish between them. So he says, he's saying they're going to look the same thing, wheat and cockle initially. So you have to kind of wait until the harvest time, and then you can kind of pluck them asunder. So I'm going to have to translate that now for a Kalenjin people. They've never heard of wheat, let alone cockle. So we have to make up a bunch of words. So the word in Kalenjin for food is bai. And so the plural for the word bai is bainik. And so we say, okay, bainik is going to mean wheat. And now we're going to make up a word for cockle. And it's going to be chemul bainik, which literally translates as that which imitates wheat.
Ah.
Beating the people over the head with the punchline. But that's what
It's lost, isn't it? Like the true meaning is lost in that translation.
his audience would immediately have gotten it. So now we're faced as well. You take an extraordinarily beautiful piece of music and the story attached to it in one language, and there are cultural and translation difficulties you can't overcome. And now you're trying to express that in a different language where the symbolism isn't understood and the subtleties of the references are not understood. So, and then the kind of particular sounds that the native speaker is going to make are hugely a part of the storytelling. And so now you've lost the original sound, and you've got cultural and a kind of interpretive kind of messing of the original message. So you befouled it both acoustically and cognitively, and so it's never the same thing in a translation in a foreign language.
And I guess that the rhythm and the instrument of the mouth will play the sounds differently, and you lose the sound. It doesn't sound as the music should.
Yeah. So you take a simple marriage. There's a Celtic blessing for a marriage, which says "Shluch Shlachta a Shluch for Shlachta," and you try and translate that now into English, or get an English speaker to try to pronounce that and watch the fun. So
Yeah.
it's like sounds that the palate can make that another language can't make. Or you take the kind of hung of the Southern Africa with the click songs, and there's no way we can produce those. And so there are songs we can't produce unless we've been born into a particular language. And these sounds have both acoustical value and kind of cognitive import. And so you're losing so much when you translate, and you don't have a native singer giving us the music.
What do you think, Sean, that we're losing in the modern world, where there's so much music and there's so much, it's so easy for new music to be produced and meaningless music, which perhaps might not have a deep soul or a deep message? What's at risk here? What's the cost of mass-produced, easily consumed music, do you think?
I think there are two costs to it. Firstly, is kind of the the verbal messages that are being transmitted through the musical tradition. When you think of like stuff like rapper music and kind of all this kind of violence of it, and particularly violence against women, and that's been promoted as that's the latest thing. So you get one problem with the message that's being given, and then you get a kind of an acoustical kind of assault on the ear with the actual sounds that are being produced, the cacophony that's resulting. And so I'm sure you heard of the work of the great Japanese scientist Emoto, who produced water, and he played particular kinds of music for glasses of water, and then he froze them and he looked at the crystalline structure. And that music that had been exposed to kind of Beethoven or Bach or classical music, and the crystallization is just beautiful, absolutely work of art. And then you take ones which are exposed to kind of like heavy metal, those musics, and it's gunky, it's dark, it's kind of crippled, the actual crystallization process. So we are crystals, we're 80% water. So you look at what's the crystallization process when we're being assaulted by the verbal messages and the kind of the frequencies of these particular kinds of sounds. And then it's like, whatever, the top 10 today is totally different from tomorrow. So we're moving on it continually. So we're not owning any part of it. We're not owning the message of the music, and we're not owning the kind of frequencies, Whereas in the old days, people had a whole repertoire of music that they learned as kids and still remembered when they were on their deathbeds in their 90s.
Wow. Yeah. So many people are disconnected from traditional music of their bloodlines or their ancestors. And that's, I guess that's kind of what I've felt inspired to do with the Celtic session, to, for me, explore what I love the sound of. And music that I'm sharing on the session is music that hits me. I will listen to a song and then I'll go, oh, wow, I need to share that song. And I feel from speaking with people around me, especially people who might have like a Celtic heritage, background, they sort of say, wow, that this music really speaks to me. And I hadn't really thought about it in the context of a spiritual or a soul level experience, as opposed to just, oh, that's music, that music is nice to listen to, or there's something else that's going on there, I think. Yeah.
I mean, in some senses, I believe that one of the functions of the DNA sequencing is that it's a tuning fork, and that in your actual DNA and your genetics, that you're pre-programmed to kind of resonate, especially to the sounds and the languages and the music of your ancestry, going back in pure genetics, and so that literally that the DNA is encoding that for you. And so you're going to, part of you is going to recognize and resonate to that in a way that you're not going to resonate with music that's coming from a different genetic lineage.
Wow, I really get that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, that, Sean. And so do you have a favorite traditional song, Sean?
Let me think about it. And so a lot of what I'll sing will be in Gaelic, obviously, but I learned some songs in English as well. So let me think. The one I sing in Mass every Sunday,
Is
yeah,
that
it's an ancient Irish monastic chant. And for me, before I say Mass, and I've been doing this for 52 years, that before I read the Gospel, I want to get into a different, an altered state of consciousness. And so it's a song in Gaelic that says, a yesa glan moch frisha go gle glan gach law. Lord Jesus, cleanse my heart completely clean every day. Then must wines to go fear flan, agus priyerum avail, make my thoughts crystal clear and the words of my mouth. It's a yesa a ye yilish juli chorihim. And Jesus, everlasting Lord, always direct my life. And so in Gaelic, here's what it sounds like. Yeso, glan machrisha, goch lechlan, goch long. Isa Yeso, chwer minzin, fweiles macht doch ran. Dan mos mwynto go firchlan agus brera mofain is o hirna a yeilish siori chwi o mofain.
Thank you, Sean. I love it when you sing that. That is beautiful. That is very beautiful. And what a fabulous way, what a really poignant way to totally just align yourself to your purpose in that moment as well. Body and soul and mind all in one through those vibrations. Thank you. Do you have a favorite traditional singer or a musician as well, Sean? Can you think of any? Because what I'd like to do on the session is I'll have our chat and I'd love to play some music of your choice to sort of go along and create the flow of our chat and then the music, as we're talking about how powerful it is to really get people to tune into what we're discussing. It'd be so beautiful to add some songs.
Oh. There's an older form of Irish music which is called the sean-os. I'm sure you've come across that.
Love it. Yeah.
So that's that's a very kind of specialized kind of singing. And there are some people who are really good at that. I think you sent me a video some time ago of was it a father-daughter?
It was probably Seamus and Kiva of Flarth Harta, and they were the siblings of, they're from Connemara, and they're in the sean-os tradition, and they sing, yeah.
So that's a beautiful form of it. And then when I was in college, although I wasn't studying music, I was studying mathematics, there was a very famous Irish musician, composer called Seán ÓLaoire. I don't know if you've come across Seán ÓLaoire. He was a professor in the music department at the same time when I was there, and he composed some really, really beautiful stuff. There was a very famous Irish movie made in the 1960s called Misha Era, I Am Ireland, and it's based on an old poem that says it's about an ancient woman who lived down in West Cork that lived for hundreds of years, and she's called the Kalenjin, the old woman of Beara, which is a peninsula in the southwest of Ireland. And it says, Misha Era, Shiname nan Chalach Beara, Moor Machlor, Medrog Truchalan Chroga, Moor Manoir, Machlaun Fein I Yellow Mohir, Misha Era, Wigni Me nan Chalach Beara. So what it says, Misha Era, Shiname nan Chalach Beara. I am Ireland, I am older than the old woman of Bera.
Wow.
Great is my glory, I who gave birth to Cuchulainn the brave. Mór man áir, great is my shame. Clown féin a yela maher. My own family who sold me out. Misha era, wigni me non chalach bera. I am Ireland, I am lonelier than the old woman of Bera.
Mm. Wow. Because there's the poem, the Cailleach Bera, where she speaks how she's reminiscing about her youth, isn't she? And then she speaks about how lonely she is as an old woman.
So
Wow.
Seán ÓLaoire composed all of the music. They made a movie called Misha Era, I Am Ireland, sometime in the 60s. And this guy, Seán ÓLaoire, created all of the musical pieces for that.
Wow.
He's a beautiful, beautiful guy. So one of my favorite singers then, although he sang a lot in English, was a guy called Seán ÓLaoire. But this was one that he sang in Gaelic. It's called the Pochad Bhuile. Have you ever heard of the Pochad Bhuile?
No, I don't think so.
Puch is a he goat, and there's a big festival in Kerry every year where they crown the king. They have a particular ram on top of a huge big stage. So this is called the Pochad Bhuile, the mad goat.
Ah.
It's something like this. Mhálam siar an drodí mhóra, pícha mo chois medal meho, ce chasfi rome gomar kioi, ach pachan kron is say ar bwilla. So it says, on my journey one evening as I'm going through a particularly, who should I happen upon but a wild goat? And he says the second verse then is, na himmer tras na trier logach, sta glois an chorak fred na mwinga, tras gyrta vor shes nor toga, chos nyan na brilla funniv. So he's been attacked by this wild goat, and finally he managed the goat, butts him in the backside and makes shreds his trousers. But he manages to just jump up on top of the goat, and he's riding it. And then the last verse is the parish priest gets involved. The priest gets butted as well in the same way by this. But this goat is every year there's a famous festival in Kerry, and there's a wild goat that's put up on top of this scaffolding, which is about 30 feet high, and he's crowned. He's the king called King Puck. He's
Awesome.
yeah, he's the king of the king of the whole festival that goes on for about a week.
Oh,
So Seán
fantastic.
ÓLaoire singing, he was one of my favorite singers.
Wonderful. I will find some of these songs and include them in the show. I just had a thought actually. I didn't think to ask you about the keening tradition
Okay.
in Ireland, because obviously, I mean, that is very powerful singing of a particular style with a particular rhythm and a particular construction with a purpose. Could you explain a little bit about the keen?
Well, there's a whole bunch of background to that. In fact, it goes way back even beyond the Celts coming to Ireland. So they came from parts of Europe, some of the Celts that had a similar tradition. So it wasn't just peculiar to the Irish, but in Ireland, I remember as a child growing up. I mean, you had it in the Bible even. There's this great story of where Jesus is asked by Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, whose little 12-year-old daughter is seriously ill. And he asked Jesus, can you come and heal my daughter? She's dying. And he's on his way to heal the daughter. And as they draw near the house, they hear all of this keening. And the mourners are in the house already. The child has already died. Father hasn't realized that. And then Jesus gets rid of them. And he says, get out of here. The child is not dead. She's sleeping. And they start kind of cussing him out because there was a profession for keening as well. And they were paid to keen. So they're professional keeners who didn't even know who the dead person was, but they would travel from village to village because they perfected this form, and they'd be paid, for keening. So there's two different kinds of keening then. There were the professionals who were doing it, because they were going to get paid, and then there was kind of family members and extended community members who knew the deceased, and their crying was kind of a natural kind of keening, but it had a very, very different cadence and a range of music, and it was kind of it became really, really important that when people are bereaved, that they have to feel the bereavement. You can't short circuit it And you can't pretend, you know, go back to work in 3 days time. You get 3 days off if somebody in the family dies, and then go back and do your job. And so they were given time to grieve and to kind of cry on each other's shoulders. And this music facilitated the emergence of that kind of visceral kind of sadness and fear and, you know, kind of loss. And so the music kind of mediated that. And so there were people who were trained to do that. You know, everybody in the village would have some knowledge of it, but particularly it was the women who had this ability. And the female voice has a range, you know, obviously in the kind of the high register, which the male voice can't reach. And so that was more appropriate for keening and for grieving, you know, than say a baritone would have been.
Mm.
You have these two kind of strands then woven in. But in every village, when somebody died, when I was a child growing up, there was a whole waking ceremony that went on for 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was a special room in Ireland. It was called the living room, and then there was the other room where you laid out the dead of the family. And people would gather for 3 days. They'd be fed food. You know, the women would get port wine, and the men would get whiskey. And everybody, men and women, would be given what were called dudines, clay pipes. They'd smoke these clay pipes. That was part of the ceremony, you know. And that literally, it got to such an stage, at one stage, that the Catholic Church banned Irish wakes, because in order to demonstrate that they had no fear of death, they would pick the corpse up off the table and they'd dance around the floor with the corpse in their arms. So the Catholic Church said, "That's it. All right, guys, enough of that. That's it." Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And so I guess music was important in living in Ireland, but then also in death, it was equally as important as as sort of a final farewell, a singing of farewell, and then also the wake, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and so
3 days, you know, of honoring the dead and the passage. Yeah.
and there would be music played at the wake, Sean?
Music and dancing. Very important. And obviously storytelling, you know, and particularly telling stories about the deceased, you know, talking about, you know, the greatness of the person who went, and people kind of demonstrating, you know, what their relationship was and how much they loved the person who was gone. So it was a way for the family and for the village to kind of process the loss, you know, because the loss to a whole village. When you lived in a little village of, you know, 50 or 60 people, any death was a loss to the village, not just to the immediate family. So that had to be processed.
Mm.
As you say, then, you know, the spoken word where you're kind of telling stories about your relationship with this person, that's one level of it. But the kind of the acoustics, the frequency, the vibration, you know, that addressed the kind of the physicality and the kind of the logos of the occasion. Only the sounds could capture that.
I sort of wish that we had such beautiful, but also sort of traditions that also hold you. They sort of provide a structure and a foundation and like a cocoon for everyone to do what they need to do with singing, with grieving, with storytelling, with remembering. We just don't really do that anymore, especially here. I think in Ireland there's still a tradition.
I think there's a little effort to kind of recapture that, you know, this notion of the death doula, that people are being spend time with the dying, you know, and to escort them through the veil. And there was a woman, I read a lot of her stuff years ago, she was a double barrel named something Schechter, who had created a group of women who would visit with the dying and they would sing, and particularly Gregorian chant. And they would spend hours and hours and hours in the presence of the person who was dying, literally to escort them through music across. She created a whole movement, actually training people how to sing to the dying.
Wow.
Therese Sheder Schachter, that's her name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking with me, Sean, and yeah, for going back in time and exploring your life growing up in Ireland and the importance of music and storytelling. And yeah, I've really enjoyed getting your perspective on things and learning new stuff, which I always do from you, Sean.
Thanks a million.